so much, both of you, for joining us here at the Misum Forum today, and for this conversation in particular. It feels like an extremely unique opportunity to have the two of you here and to be able to discuss the topic of poverty alleviation. You both lead businesses that have production and operation in low and middle income countries such as India, Brazil, South Africa, and others. And as I said, we are very honored to discuss this topic with you. We will start with a very broad question, perhaps, related to the title of this event. What would you say the role and responsibility of the private sector is in the development of low-income countries in general and in poverty alleviation, as per Martina's broad definition before? We can start with you, Marcus, and then move to Carl. And before you start, I also want to say that please, in any of the questions that we ask you, feel free to chip in to each other's responses if you have anything to add. So the role and responsibility of private sector in poverty alleviation.
I think that you have to... okay, let's start here. Poverty is a known fact. It's really horrible. In addition to what we know about poverty, there is a war, a humanitarian crisis, which unfortunately will impact one side of poverty, namely that Russia and Ukraine are the two of the principal exporters of grain and foodstuff to the rest of the world. So on that question, it's an absolutely horrific situation that we find ourselves in this moment. Just so I've said that, because I think nobody has a different view. So I would say that you have to ask yourself, from a business point of view, how can you help? Because it will not help a chief executive of a public company to go to the shareholders and say, my number one priority is to help poverty. Because that chief executive probably will not stay very long in his job. So I think that the most important thing is that companies can do is to try to be part of the long-term solutions that really long-term can help. We have, of course, crisis when people are from various parts of humanitarian crises that you can, of course, support. But I think companies can play and are playing roles within their scope and their field and their operations in various parts of the world. And I think that one of the important things for businesses is actually to run their business in such a way that they can support. Because businesses that are not making money and that are not developing themselves and that are not continuously being competitive, they will have a very hard time to be long-term as part of the solution. So I think we have to think about the role of business, that we have operations in different parts of the world. We are part of a market. We have to stay competitive in what we do. But on top of that, we can do a number of things, depending on what business it is, to help the situation where we are. Or have enough surplus to support Pratham, as an example. Because if we have no surplus to give away, it's very hard to support Pratham. And I think Swedish businesses have tried to do this over the years. So I started to travel to Brazil in different parts of the world in the 80s, and I was quite amazed to see how a company like SKF is one of our most global companies with operations in so many countries around the world, how they actually participated by making sure that people came to their jobs, by transporting to the jobs, letting mothers bring their children, organizing possibilities for the kids to have either in kindergarten, schooling, medical support, etc., etc. And I think that is an example of what Swedish businesses actually had, so to speak, a humanitarian side to what they tried to do in the different places. And of course, it was also in their interest because they needed healthy, educated, and well served, people who are actually in a position with their families that they actually could participate in doing the work at these different sites. So I think there are many, many things businesses can do, but I think we have to understand it has to be within the framework of their total operations, because it has to be a long-term solution.
Thank you so much. Carl, how do you see the role and responsibility of private sector?
No, I can continue on what Marcus is saying, and so it's about two things, or I would say three steps. The first is that you are building a competitive environment, because the market economy has shown that it can take nations out of poverty, and do so every day. So you have to build it, and you have to build the market and the competitive position in the country you're working, as you are doing in other countries. You have to have the local presence. You have to be decentralized. You have to be the strength. You have to build the strengths in the country you are working. You can't go out from directives, from centralized directives. You have to be sure that you are building a really good position long term. And the third thing is you have to do it together with the society. And what means together? That means that you are building the education in your company, and you do it with the society you're in. You have to make sure that you have the ethic position, that you act according to the values you have in your company. So let's build on these three stages: the market economy, the decentralized position, and the cross-working with the society you are at. So when you do these three things, you are building a strength in that country. You are working for bringing people out of poverty. And then you have, of course, adjust to what is happening. But it is not more difficult than to see the opportunities and build on education. That's why a project like Pratham, with entrepreneurship, with education, and with evaluation, makes it trustworthy and makes it legitimate.
So, thank you.
So you're saying, which is that the core activities, of course, the business, and to build a competitive business, that's what makes you be able to pull the threads even further on. So the direct impact that poverty alleviation has on, the direct impact that Swedish business and business in general have in low-income countries on poverty alleviation is through the job creation channel. So you have a business, you create jobs, you give an income, and then it moves on like that. But how much of this responsibility for business do you think is outside of the job creation channel? And is there a responsibility that is bigger than this job creation channel? And elaborate a little bit on when is a project or an investment in societal development, if I put it like that, relevant to a company?
I think it's a very hard question to have a general opinion about. But because I think both Carl and I have a huge amount of respect, and I think we're quite humbled that when we come to a different place, we understand it's a very, very different place from home is. So I think to build a little bit on what Carl talked about, being grounded where you are to be able to make a long-term difference. Because I still want to make a difference between, we have to, at least from my point of view, as a company, hopefully you can be part of a long-term solution, just not trying to do something very quickly. So I do believe that we have to take the problems that exist in different places and try to solve them there, which means that you will probably have to partner with somebody since you don't have those resources yourself. I think Pratham is a very good example of that. And then it comes back to that you have to feel, and I think that's part of the responsibility, you have to feel that the people that you are cooperating with have the same values and are driven by the same end goal and objectives as you do yourself when you try to support the local community. And because I think it's very easy to get into partnership with somebody that maybe not is the same. At the end of the day, it's not the same value. So I think that is a very important thing. It's very easy in this poverty discussion to just make a general statement about everything, but it's an incredible difference to operate in Brazil from India. You have different religion, you have different politics, you have different culture, which means that, and I think this is a very good point by Carl, you have to rely on that the people who are working in each country do find the right partnerships, do find the possibility to operate in that country, do make sure that they are so competitive that they make enough strength in their economic business that actually can support what's going on around them. So I think those are important parameters for businesses.
I think so. This is very interesting, and we will discuss partnerships more soon. But just to stay a bit longer on the broader sort of role and responsibility question, and to clarify, are there areas that you would say are outside the responsibility, the role and responsibility? So sort of what is outside the boundaries of corporate responsibility? Yeah, you can.
No, but, you should start with your company, for example, your product and your service which you are contributing in the market. If you do your job in a competitive way, you must see this as an opportunity. You go into a market, it's an enormous opportunity to build that long term. You have to act with good judgment, as you have to do in all other markets. It's not something special. You have to have the right values from the beginning, but you have to understand I can't move in and say, this is my values, here I'm acting. You have, of course, to understand where you are, what is the culture, and that's why it's so important with education that you don't not only do know one sort of science, you have to understand that these are working across the society. And you understand your country, you understand the culture there, and you act according to good values. So what can you not? You should not try to move into politics and be because that is something that belongs to the country itself. But you can of course show the value of your company, of how you are working. And then you are building a competitive environment, you have building out the market, the people are paying taxes, the company are paying taxes, you are really serving the development of the society. Yeah. It's a very positive opportunity.
And maybe also staying with the areas of your competence.
Yes.
Because Getinge can participate in the medical side, yeah. But maybe are not as effective in other parts of the business, exactly. Which I think is competence. We should not forget competence in this whole discussion. How can we support that? And I think there are many aspects to that question, of course, but at the end of the day, we have to remember that we're now close to 8 billion people on this globe. And we live in a country which is 10 million. And we operate in countries which may have over 1 billion people. I think we may not understand the magnitude of challenges for people who are trying to lead those countries. I mean, it's so enormous. It's so many different. I don't know if you take India, if I understand it right, there are so many different cultures within the country itself. There are so many political views. There are so many different traditions that come in different parts, and you have to adapt to each place where you are, to the local circumstances. And they have maybe 50 to. I mean, I shouldn't put words in the words of our Indian friends here, but we have to understand that they operate in a country where maybe 50 to 100 million people have nothing.
Yeah.
They have absolutely nothing. And how do they think about that? And how can you participate in those challenges? I think that is the question, in an effective way, but also long term. Because I really like to stress this long term thing, because otherwise it just becomes, you can very quickly go broke by just giving everything away for an immediate thing, but you may have not created anything for the long term. So you have to find something for the long term.
So if I just try to summarize a little bit, and then you can correct me if I misinterpreted. So staying out of politics is, for example, one in the local region. Relying on your competence and your expertise, working long term, not doing short term, drastic investments, and relying on the local environment and the local institutions or the local civil society for collaborations and working with this longer term.
Yeah, but you may have to do things on a short-term basis, but for a very specific situation. But I think the aim should be to try to help out long-term, if you can.
And then perhaps building on that summary, Carl and Marcus, could you give any examples of how the companies that you are engaged with are working in poverty alleviation, as per the broader definition? So this could also be projects within the job creation channels as well, or the broader societal development.
Yes, take, for example, Getinge. When we are in our different countries, we serve with medical technology and ventilation products like ventilators, who has been a very important survivor during the COVID times. What do we do? Yeah, we develop in our position together with hospitals in the different countries. We build a healthcare structure where we use the knowledge of the country to adjust our products, which can make an even better healthcare. So we are not only running sales, we are also running form of assembly, production, and research. We use the knowledge that is in the country, and we transfer our own knowledge. So that is an example. And at the same time, we are in healthcare, which is a critical area for the development, like sanitation and education. So that's a combination between being there, developing the competitive strengths, and working with healthcare knowledge. Both taking knowledge from the country for bringing better products into the country and making possibility for the country to produce and sell products to other countries. So that is at the same time developing the country's competitive structure and having our knowledge exchange with the hospitals in the country.
Thank you. And in a project like that, or in that work, it's not a project, but in that work, and in working with the local contexts, what would you see as sort of big challenges when you work for that broader goal? And these challenges can also be related to other projects that you do.
The challenge is always that the education can follow. So that is why it's so important to collaborate with the country you are in the education area. For example, taking on, if you know, trainees, apprentices, there you start to really build the knowledge level in the company at the same time as you are building up a competitive structure. So education is the key in all aspects, and a continuous education of the people you have. And so that is, then you are contributing to the country immediately.
Yeah, these apprentice programs are something that you work with quite a lot in your companies.
You have to adjust to the possibilities in the country you are in, but there are some good examples in Europe, especially Germany has a good structure for that. But this is a thing which you can develop, because then you can take people who right away move up the organization with a small education from the beginning, but then you add on and you build the structure, the competitive structure. So that is a normal way of building a good environment. But education is number one.
Thank you. Marcus, do you want to give any examples of how you work?
Well, I think many companies are doing different things. I think, you can take Atlas Copco doing, for example, water for all, where they actually see to that. Poverty comes in many different shapes and forms, I guess, but water is a very key element. They are using their resources in this foundation that is tied to Atlas Copco, which actually goes around and gets water, fresh water into villages, one of the absolute key components. I think a number of educational projects are underway in different parts of the world. Ericsson is, for example, doing a lot on the supporting disaster reliefs and different for communication, which is absolutely key when you have to help out in difficult situations. I happen to be a very long-standing director of AstraZeneca, which is, despite the debate that has been going on, is actually, if I'm not wrong, the company which has provided more COVID shots than any other company in the world. We have administered more than 3 billion shots, which of course have helped and saved a lot of lives by doing that. So I think that we just have to understand that the problems are huge and among us, but these companies, this example, why are they doing it? Atlas Copco is, for a long time, been working with drilling techniques, and therefore they understand that business. Communication is the core of Ericsson's business, and the core of AstraZeneca is actually to provide medicines to meet unmet medical needs. And that is really the key of these. And these are examples of companies actually participating. Are they the solution to all problems? No. But in these particular questions, they have been actually contributing in their ways and are contributing in their ways in a way to provide support for society. And the reason why, one of the reasons why AstraZeneca vaccine shot has been used, I guess, is that it actually allows to transport that vaccine in places where you don't have deep freeze possibilities, with a low cost to each shot, and therefore being part of the COVAX program of the United Nations. So you have to, it just serves as an example that you have possibility to act when you have possibilities to act, but it's not something that you can generalize for all businesses in all different fields. So
I guess
part of those examples.
That's also a good example of you talk about long term, but that's a short term, quick action that was necessary.
Yeah, and the decision actually by the company was really not whether we had a long-term vaccine expertise. It was, the decision was really, can we help? And the answer was right away, yes. And we tried to do it from there.
So I think this is very interesting, and I love to hear these different examples and so on. Let me bring in academia a little bit in this discussion. So Swedish industries, as we hear and as we talked about, but also more than this, involved in many projects that aim to improve development outcomes and outcomes in these low-income countries. However, very few of these attempts are rigorously evaluated, according to my knowledge at least. I might not know everything. And through the rigorous evaluation, it would be possible to contribute to policy and learning much broader than what stays within the help itself or with the investment or the project itself. So as business people, when you do investments in general in your business, you want to know the return. You want to know the cost effectiveness. You want to know that your investment is productive. We would then presume that business also would like to know that the money they invest in social responsibility projects are effective and productive and cost effective. So by putting it up like that, do you think, and how do you think we can improve this productive agenda for business or for industry and academia to collaborate and evaluate more on respect to these projects that are ongoing, and then through that contribute to the learnings that are much broader and the policies on how to fight poverty? What are your thoughts, and how do you think we can push the business community in this direction? What is needed, or what are your thoughts? How difficult is it?
No, I think that you're stat major, aren't you? No, yeah. Stop.
No, but I think that it's not so. Evaluation is something which legitimate the whole thing. We have seen it in our Pratham project when you discuss with partners. As soon as you have a evaluation, you have a much more trustworthy base to act from. So when we did this with you, I could see major steps in the discussion with our partners. It's evaluated, and we have had the honor to do it together with the methods that you have worked with MIT. So it was an international organization or method behind. And this gave it a base to act from. So more evaluation you can do out of also social projects, the more you can step forward, and also with local actors. So I would say evaluation is what you do in business life of your projects, and you can do it also on these type of activities. And one must understand, it's not on help. It is to, when you build a competitive environment, you contribute to the country. And with a competitive environment, you need to take business grounds, but also social. You have to be part of the society. So it's very it's natural that you go forward, both with competitive activities and with social activities based on your values. So evaluation is the key to continue.
But then the follow-up question is, so I know that you and me agree on that, but how do we get this to be appreciated in the bigger business community, that in order to rigorously evaluate?
But it's very motivating to get feedback. It's not for only you and me. It's motivating to see how this is developing. It's motivating for those who are, for example, the teachers in Assam. It's very motivating. It's motivating for the parents. It's motivating for the society. And it's motivating for us. Yeah. And it legitimates how we can go forward. It's more easy to come and discuss with our partners. Here is the result. When we are discussing together with our partners, it's very important to show what are we doing and how is it going. And it's also it's not very difficult. It doesn't have to be so advanced from the beginning, but that you show the evaluation to draw conclusions, to continue your work. That is legitimating the whole thing.
I think we're learning more and more as businesses to measure parameters that we have not measured before. So the whole question around ESG, and I can see that from the bank's point of view, and especially on climate, the whole financial system is now being required to measure something that we really hardly measured before. And I think it takes time to develop these measures so that they become relevant. And one thing one has to, I think, be very meticulous about is that you really understand what your goal is. What is green when you finance a green project? How do you define green? And how do you avoid greenwashing, as an example? So if you would start trying to measure poverty, how you as a company would help on poverty, I think it's important to understand what you're measuring. Because otherwise you will go wrong in what you're trying to measure. If you actually think that drilling for water is a part of helping out poverty, but then we have to think about, is it liters per minute that we're developing, that we're measuring, or what are we actually measuring?
Or is it the health of the people who are using that water?
Exactly, but that might be impacted by so many different things. But suddenly you have some sort of a medical thing that comes in which has nothing to do with the water. And so it's we all know the world is a complex place. So what I'm just trying to suggest is that if we're going to start measuring things like you're suggesting, then we have to understand what we're measuring and how we're measuring it to really make sense. And it comes through so very definite when we work with the questions around climate and the impact of industry and so on today.
But I do think that academia can contribute in that. What are we measuring and how are we measuring and how are we getting it right?
It's
And I think there should be more.
As an example again.
I have to interrupt here. This is super interesting, and I would love to speak more about this. And I think how we can learn in projects is extremely important, and also goes back to the how the poverty alleviation area can seem a bit abstract and difficult to measure sometimes, as you indicated before in the introductory speech. We only have a few minutes left for this discussion, so we will actually ask one last question before we hand over to the audience for a few questions. One question. Thank you, Andrea. And so just a final sentence from each of you. What do you see if you look at how companies take a responsibility in this broad topic? How do you see the future of how companies engage in these questions? What would you like to see more or less of? But if you can summarize that in one sentence each.
I'll point to a difficulty. Not that I want to make a problem out of this, but I think it's an important question when you think about what the world is facing. The CEO of SEB went to United Nations to sign the bank agreement on climate. The banks were so he went there to New York. And after the signing, many banks from many different places, after the signing of that agreement, the Secretary General asked a few of them, what is really climate and the ESG and sustainability about? And Johan came back and he said, you have to understand that when we Europeans talk about sustainability, it's one thing. But then suddenly you go to South America, and there the sustainability is all about creating jobs. And in Indian perspective with the bank, it's maybe that people should not go hungry. So we just have to understand that there are so many different perspectives on this. And therefore, I'm back to the question, yes, I fully support that we should measure what we do, but we have to understand what we're measuring and how we're measuring it.
Thank you. Good reflection. Carl.
Yeah, you should see the opportunities, but also, of course, see the challenges. And the challenges you can pass by educating the environment you are in. So I would say see the opportunities, see what needs to be done to build on the market you are in, create a competitive structure, and act with good values. Then you have to take steps by step. You have, of course, these big perspectives, but if you are building a strength in the place you are in, then you are already contributing. So I would say it's a combination of really taking steps, seeing the opportunities, but also seeing what needs to be done to pass the challenges. And there you have to build on both education and evaluation.
Thank you so much. So we're going to leave the floor for a few questions. Do we have questions? We have a question down there. The microphone.
It's a banker. You can ask.
Hi, Eric Winter, BNP. Thanks for a great conversation and congratulations to your new jobs.
Yes.
One slightly maybe provocative question. What about giving it all away, like Patagonia or Bill Gates?
That's the lovely thing with market economy. You're free to do what you want. No, but can I just be serious for a minute? The Mars Foundation, mostly known for sweets and pet food, they have created a foundation which actually is looking at a global economic model, which actually takes aim, not trying to, destroy businesses or anything else, but really trying to look at the whole chain of supplies and actually how much falls into each bucket. And I know this has gained a lot of discussion in Europe, at least, and the United States, on a different way to think about how you want to spread the gains of the different suppliers in the chain. So it's a very complicated thing, I understand, but I don't know the detail, but it's an interesting initiative to try to study this.
One more question and the last one. I think
You have two there.
it's okay. So let's take that one, and then the other one we can take in the break.
Hi, thank you for a thought-provoking talk. I'm Karin Svedberg Helgesson, and I'm an associate professor here at the SSE. So I'm soon starting a course where I'm teaching decision-making. So I was thinking about what you said about, on the one hand, the importance of definitions when you measure, and on the other hand, that it's very important to work with society, but not to get into politics, which seemed to be an issue where you agreed. So I was wondering, from the perspective of decision-making and definitions, how do you, in practice, distinguish between society and politics? How do you know where to draw the line? What is to do with society and what is politics?
It's not easy. So there comes number one is your values and good judgment. And that's why when you are acting in a market, you must really build up an knowledgeable leadership who understands that we are coming from a democracy. We are, of course, more than 50% is not democracies, but we are acting according to the laws in that country, but also at the same time, you are building up the values in your organization. So it is, in fact, good judgment. But if you give good examples and you show also what you are not accepting, for example, we have been facing, in my group, difficulties in corruption, and you when you in different markets, and when that happens, you just show the values of the group and you act accordingly. But then also comes, of course, education. So now we are educating much more than before, and we are seeing much more companies coming into real market economies. But we have challenges with that, and you can really improve your acting by education within this area, for example. So that is within the values of the company, combination with education.
Yeah, I think quite similar. I think that the governance systems of these large corporations which are acting on a multinational basis, you have to understand that if you are in a country, you have to observe the rules and the traditions of that country, and may come into some sort of basic conflict how you look upon it as a company, and that makes these questions somewhat very difficult. And I think corruption is a very one of those parts which is extremely certain parts of this world. We have to live in societies where corruption is a big part of it, and as companies you can, at least from my point of view, not deal with it and have anything to do with it, and therefore it's in a number of areas where we come from one society with one perspective, but at the end of the day you have to live in a country as a company where you adhere to the rules and the regulations of that place to your best abilities, and while still being within the framework of your own values and culture in the company and your aims and motivations. And as you say, Carl, this is not an easy thing, but that's not why executives are paid. They're paid to take very difficult decisions. So it's, but it is a complicated world from that point of view.
But you should not step away for the challenges and say, oh, that's very difficult to act in that country. That is a problem with the corruption, so I don't want to be there. If you have, for example, a product or service who is contributing to the society in the country, you should, of course, move in and establish yourself if you can compete and develop long term. It's a fantastic thing to be part of a development in a country there where you can see that you are really contributing to.
And to your point, if I may say so, you know, think about it in the reverse, from the reverse position. Say that I'm now in a country X, there is corruption. I have an operation with 500 or 1,000 people. Is it the right thing, responsibly, to leave the country and leave all these people that you employ and all these families that are dependent on that person that you employ, just because you think it's wrong? Or do you try to deal with it and try to avoid that part of that of operating in that country? So I'm fully behind you. There are two sides to this responsibility. Just standing up and walk away is not taking the responsibility, maybe.
So with that said on responsible ownership is a perfect ending of this fireside chat. Let us thank Carl Bennet and Marcus Wallenberg with a warm applause for this discussion.